Good afternoon to our viewers in Germany and good morning to our viewers in the United States. I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and I'd like to welcome you to today's discussion. This past weekend marked a major step in Germany's commitment to support Kyiv in its battle against the Russian invasion. On Saturday, Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced an arms package to provide more tanks, armored vehicles, and air defense systems to Ukraine, totaling some 2.7 billion euros or nearly $3 billion. The announcement came just before talks between Chancellor Scholz and President Volodymyr Zelensky and is widely seen as an attempt to reset the relationship between the two countries after Germany's hesitancy to provide heavy weapons. To talk about German foreign and security policy, I'm delighted to welcome a longtime friend of the American Council on Germany, journalist Klaus-Dieter Frankenberger, who previously served as the foreign editor of the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. Herzlich willkommen, Klaus-Dieter. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Steve, for having me. It's a pleasure.
It is always good to talk to you, and it's always wonderful to hear your insights. And so I thought we could maybe start by talking about this commitment that was announced by Olaf Scholz over the weekend on Saturday. And with this pledge, it basically makes Germany the strongest supporter of Ukraine after the United States. And I'd be curious to see sort of, I guess, right off the bat, or to hear right off the bat, how this announcement, how this pledge has been received in Germany. What's the domestic response been to this?
Well, again, Steve, thank you very much for hosting me. It's a pleasure to be on your program, and we are longtime friends and colleagues, and it's always good to talk about the intricacies of German politics and the arcane debates going on in Berlin or previously in Bonn. Be honest with you, I have been pretty much surprised, and I have not been surprised at the same time by the announcement of a considerable aid package to Kiev. If you look at it, it is a major one. You pointed out $3 billion almost, making Germany the second largest supplier of arms and aid to Ukraine. Support is not petering out. It is holding, and actually it's almost even increasing if you look at the raw numbers. And I'm sure there's a political message going with it. When you asked about the German response, other than previous arms deliveries and debates about the tanks, the Leopard, and so forth, the reaction is almost muted. Mm-hmm. We had a state election over the weekend in the city-state of Bremen that took a lot of the attention away from the Ukraine issue. But other than that, it is almost, the package is significant by itself. It's probably the largest one since the Zeitenwende speech 15 months ago. And the public are basically shrug the shoulders and says, well, that's what we do. We have to remind ourselves that the public, by large numbers, clearly identifies Russia / Vladimir Putin as the aggressor in this war, and Ukraine the victim. Or the public is much less enthusiastic in supplying weapons. The public thinks Ukraine should not concede territory, but the enthusiasm comes down to a third of the public in supplying arms. Mm-hmm. In light of this, this gesture of presenting repairing relations in a certain sense with Kiev, as you phrased it, are a major arms package at the beginning of Zelensky's tour of Europe, is a strong sign of support, is a strong signal of determination and further commitment. I would think if you would extrapolate a little bit, and what do I make of the quote, the wording, we support Ukraine as long as it takes, I think they mean it. they mean it, hoping this conflict will not drag into 24 or even 25, that this comes to an end. And that's why they are now pushing for making this counter offensive, which is underway or almost underway, a successful one.
So you've sort of teed up several questions I'd love to ask you and follow up about, some of which I plan to ask in any case, and some of which you've brought up. And I guess one of them is, you talked about how support for Ukraine in Germany is holding strong and even increasing. I think, based on some of the surveys that I've seen over the past few months, it seems very much as if the public is supporting German support of Ukraine. There has been some reluctance when it comes to providing heavy military equipment, and we can get into that a little bit later, and how this situation is very different from the long drawn out debate over Leopard tanks. But before we do that, I'm wondering if you're seeing any difference in the demographics of how there is support for Kiev in Germany, and who is supporting German support of Kiev. One of the reasons why I'm asking is that we recently in our office had an opportunity to speak with a group of young people and from Germany, students in their 20s. And we were sort of surprised because about 75% of them, while they felt that Kiev and Ukraine was the victim and that Putin and Russia was the aggressor, they were opposed to delivering weapons to support the Ukrainian military. I thought that was something that was changing a little bit. And so I'm curious, to hear your sense of which segments of the society are supportive. Are there other segments that are reluctant? Are you able to sort of shed any light on that?
Well, the dimension, which is, to my mind, clearly affecting this debate at the regional dimension.
Mm-hmm.
West Germany is strongly behind Ukraine. East Germans are much more reluctant to agree to the government position, sending arms. And contrary, there are probably 50-50 split, are 50% in favor, 50% are against, if not more, are for various reasons. Our elderly Germans are reluctant to agree because they feel dragged into a direct confrontation and conflict with Russia. No, so in a sense, we have done this. We have been there. No, not so ever again. I'm really surprised that your young Germans were mostly against it, because this is not what I hear. You find here all sorts of opinions. I'd always thought the younger ones are more supportive, are the greenish voters, are young SPD voters, not the old rank and file SPD voters. Christian Democratic voters are mostly in favor of the government's position. What they criticize, the opposition, the Christian Demo, they criticize the hesitancy, the reluctance in the first couple of months of last year. They are not against our sending arms. To the contrary, they are actually in favor of stepping up and be much more forceful and vigorous in support. But my bottom line is, the party is holding. It is not dwindling, and it's even increasing at the moment as we speak. At this moment as we speak.
So I would like to come back to this comparison. I think many of our viewers, our listeners, are aware that there was a long, drawn out process before Germany gave the green light for its advanced Leopard tanks to be sent to Ukraine. This was after obviously sending armored personnel vehicles and providing other support, but it was really this debate over the heavy tanks that took a very long time. And yet this announcement on Saturday from the chancellor seemed very proactive and deliberate, and did not seem to be as wound up in public debate, but also in a sense of hesitancy. Can you parse for us some of the differences between the decision-making process that we're seeing, and shed some light on why maybe Germany is moving forward much more quickly right now?
Yeah. The one thing that struck me, it's basically, there was basically no reference to the United States and to the US policy towards Kiev in terms of weapons deliveries. This was at a complete difference to the previous issues we debated, armored vehicles, tanks, anti-aircraft, and so forth. What is remarkable since the beginning of Russia's brutal war, which I call a neo-colonial war, a war of annihilation against a Western neighbor and country, was remarkable how often the Chancellor Scholz has stressed the importance of the relationship of the alliance with the United States. He said this over and over and over again. He didn't speak about our European autonomy. He didn't say much about European sovereignty, other than our President Macron in Paris and his team. Now Baerbock, the German foreign minister, has said something about sovereignty, but how important this relationship with the United States is in general, for Germany, for Europe, and in this war. Now we seem to go a step further, and of course we have to do something by ourselves, independently, as much as we can. The UK, Italy, France, and so forth. And this I find remarkable. We cannot always wait when it comes to these kind of weapons categories, and should act as a strong ally and a strong partner of Ukraine, and as a strong nation in Europe. I found this remarkable. In my judgment, this whole debate, this dragging, this unhealthy dragging out of a debate about the Leopard. We could have reached a consensus and agreement, could have reached one in early September. The Chancellor said, when the United States is willing to send a couple of Abrams to Kiev, we will supply whatever is on the yard. But probably the US didn't take this serious enough. I mean, this was his, so to speak, red line then. Took half a year, 6 months, until we overcame that hurdle. Eventually we did this. Now he seems to have freed himself from the restrictions, self-enforced restrictions on what to do. I mean, the whole Zeitenwende is an indication. The Zeitenwende approach is a recognition of Germany's past failures, but also a recognition that we have to do something forcefully about European security, about German security, about Western security and defense, and not just waiting. But the Scholz line was, again, always in cooperation and in close tandem with the United States. Rarely did he speak of the German-French axis, so to speak, when it comes to defense and security issues. It's always been the United States, our life insurance, as others have said, close as possible. That's why I found remarkable he didn't say very much about this one last weekend. Yeah, that's interesting. That's a very interesting observation. And a little bit later, I'd like to come back to what you were just talking about as far as France and some of the other European countries are concerned, and this kind of question of European leadership. But before we do that, it's been interesting, particularly in recent weeks. Olaf Scholz and the relatively new defense minister, Boris Pistorius, have talked about Germany providing, quote, all the help that it can, and for as long as it takes. And I'm curious to get a sense from you of what that actually means. How much support will Germany provide? I mean, obviously, we've seen a breakthrough as of Saturday, but how long is as long as it takes, particularly given the background of what you just said, that there's hope, real hope,
that the conflict will end this year. And I personally am just not so sure that that's realistic.
No, Steve, I totally agree, because Putin obviously thinks time is on his side. He's counting definitely on battle fatigue in Ukraine, or counting on support fatigue in Europe and in the US. He knows that you are going to vote in a new president in November 24. And he knows the dynamics of party politics in the Congress. And he knows that a good chunk of our Republican voters are against sending aid to or military equipment to Ukraine, or 50% of Republicans think already too much aid is given to Ukraine. So he knows all that. Here means, so time is of the essence, and on both sides. I mean, the counteroffensive must show some results, not just marginal or regaining of territory, but must make a strategic breakthrough. I would think the European nations I mentioned earlier, Germany, France, UK, or you mentioned Denmark, Italy, and others, whatever they have are available, or know this too, and also fear that there is some sort of support fatigue. I emphasized earlier, none at the moment, but come next winter, things may be different. I would like also to say one point about why now and why so strongly. Yes, the government is aware. I would think that it has taken a hit by its hesitancy and reluctance in the earlier months, or it has lost influence in East Germany, or it has to recover. It has to, reposition itself as a credible ally. I mean, President Zelensky was really very forthcoming and almost praising Germany when he was in Berlin, and later on in Aachen when he received the Karls Prize, most prestigious prize in Europe, calling Germany a true friend and a reliable ally. Now, in Poland and in the Baltics and other Central and Eastern European countries, you may hear something different about our German leadership and about Germany's commitment. And now they know that, and they have to do something about it. And so they try to recover, so to speak, lost political capital amongst European allies. On the other hand, and the third point is, well, look at the state of the Bundeswehr. We have started this war as a contributor of equipment to and for Ukraine with a disastrous state of affairs in the Bundeswehr. That's why we have this 100 billion euro special fund, to beef up the defense industry, equipment, and so forth. The Bundeswehr is a dismal state. Whenever they look around, they doesn't work. The Cougar doesn't work. Only when it's really, not in combat operations. Aircrafts don't fly. It is about to change, but that means that the pool of available equipment is rather limited, and that's why they go to the manufacturers and they look around at your yards. Do you have something available which we can send rather quick? Yep. Same thing is true in France. Same thing is true even in the UK. Same thing is true is Italy, Spain. They have all Leopard tanks, and just maybe one or two are actually operational. This is disaster. This is an indictment of what we have done in the past. Our governments, partner governments, come back. That's the state where we begin. So it's getting better, but that's why it takes so long to come to numbers that may have or do have a meaningful impact on the battleground.
So Klaus-Dieter, that actually ties in with a question that was just submitted by one of our viewers, who points out that, of course, one of the important aspects of Olaf Scholz's Zeitenwende speech was to improve Germany's defense capability itself. And this new $3 billion package does not bring Germany any closer to being able to field a battle-ready division so that it can meet its NATO support obligations. And so one of the questions that I think can be sort of rift off of that is, what can you tell us about this special fund that Olaf Scholz had announced last February in his Zeitenwende speech? Because one of the things that we're hearing is that very little of that, if any of it, has actually been spent, and that there are huge challenges with procurement around that. So the deficits of the Bundeswehr that you were just talking about don't seem to have been filled, and there don't seem to be steps in place to try to address that.
This is absolutely true. Opposition parties, such as the Christian Democrats, they really hammered the government for that, because they say, and I think they are correct, yes, we approved the 100 billion special fund, but no money has been actually allocated for particular projects, or the cooperation with the arms manufacturers is still in the infancy. I mean, a new one. That's the whole thing. We have to set up the whole system actually anew. Cooperation with manufacturers, the base of the manufacturers, and so forth. A new agency maybe to be put in place for providing the procurement, and then bringing the equipment into the military itself, training and all the rest. Takes a long time. We lost some time, but with the new defense minister, Boris Pistorius, who is a remarkable, forceful guy, and he's addressing that. He's addressing the shortcomings, the shortfalls. He's addressing the lack of spending, is that we need much more. We should go beyond 2%. I mean, he's a social democrat, and the social democrats had always ridiculed the 2% threshold, even though Steinmeier, when he was foreign minister, signed off to it. But, we have to do this now. I'll bring this on a long-term basis to correct and improve our deficits and really get to the capability we need. But the war is now, and not in 2034. Hopefully not, actually. We need it now, so they actually scratch where they can scratch equipment, and improve it, maintain it, and then send it to Ukrainians, have them trained. One thing I'm concerned, if we go look around Europe, is that, as I said, a couple of nations have supplied artillery, tanks, and others, that a lot of things are not really coordinated very well. Now, we know that Ukrainian soldiers are ingenious in using this potluck sort of our equipment that is on offer. I hear really praise and how they make use of these different equipment, these different tanks, different artillery systems. They have to train them, and then, repeat their training on the battleground in active combat, in real combat. This is great, but some things could have been coordinated. I mean, when Macron announced the new contingent of tanks and French tanks to the Ukraine, are not a single word of coordination with Germany. Sunak in the UK didn't say a single word about that colleagues in Rome and Paris have done that. So we are almost disconnected, and this, I think, is a great liability. Also, apart from our domestic shortcomings, which are serious. You're absolutely right.
So this actually provides a great opening to kind of widen the aperture and look at Europe a little bit more broadly. And you've obviously brought up Europe a little bit in the course of our conversation so far. I'd be curious off the bat to hear from you how this announcement by Olaf Scholz on Saturday has gone over in other European countries. Is this something that's welcomed? Is it something that's causing concern? And then I would like to come back to Macron and France and maybe talk a little bit about leadership in Europe, because it seems that there's a tremendous opportunity for Olaf Scholz and for Germany to show real leadership in addressing this challenge, but then other challenges that Europe has in common as well.
Well, so where do we start? Actually, that's the whole leadership question. Rewind. Poland in particular has criticized Germany for being doing too little, too late, being reluctant, and are not up to the occasion. When our President Zelensky received the Karls Prize in Aachen, he called Scholz the defender of Europe. And he went on to say he will, and his government will be remembered as the defender of Europe. Now, almost saying the savior of Europe. Germany had lost considerable political capital in parts of Europe, and in parts, as I said, Poland, the Baltics. You don't hear too much criticism these days from Poland vis-a-vis Germany. Or most resources that could be delivered, most equipment had been delivered, and a lot of stocks are depleted. Macron is more or less silent on the Ukraine-Russia war these days. He had burnt his fingers with his initiative vis-a-vis China a few weeks ago. His overtures towards Russia last year, we're going to continue to speak and talk, went nowhere. Actually, it is an embarrassment for the French president, I thought, at the time, to always repeat, to talk to someone who has no intention not to talk, no intention to talk, not intention to seriously negotiate with his Ukrainian counterpart. Now, Europe itself, the EU is, of course, has become a forceful actor in terms of sanctions. 11th package now underway, Europe as a geopolitical actor under von der Leyen. She is doing what she can do within the limits of her mandate, so to speak. The others have acted, up and down. One, UK more forceful than the others, and then Germany coming up. There is a little bit of a vacuum in Europe at the moment. There is no strong leader at the moment. I think the German government eventually has become aware of the credibility gap it really facing. At the beginning, they tried to deny it a little bit, washing over it, pampering over it, saying it's not so severe. We sent so much. We're number two. We have been number two from the beginning. If we collapse our humanitarian, financial, economic, and military aid, but now the thing that matters at the moment is military aid and support, and there is some room to improve and to provide the kind of leadership which others want us to provide. Not in saying that we dominate and dictate, but in concert with others, but at least as a kind of trailblazer with the consent of the others. I found this a good idea from Poland. Poland's former foreign minister years ago. Germany provides the leadership with the consent of others. That's when we gain credibility. There is a credibility gap, and the government is, I would think, recognizing it, agreeing that there is one, and we have to do something about it seriously. And at this moment, we are at this moment now.
Yeah. So Klaus-Dieter, I mean, sticking with the military domain and with sort of Europe as a whole, it's been interesting on this trip across Europe. Zelensky seems to have been getting commitments from other European governments as well to provide support. And you've talked a little bit about that already. But I found it particularly interesting to read that yesterday Zelensky was in Reykjavik at a meeting of European leaders, and the top point on his agenda was asking for their support in securing fighter jets for Ukraine's defense forces. And there was some interesting reporting about the British and Dutch prime ministers, Rishi Sunak and Mark Rutte, talking about creating an international coalition that would give fighter jets to Ukraine and help train Ukrainian pilots to fly them. Germany has certainly been reluctant to provide fighter jets. The United States has been reluctant to provide fighter jets. How much of an issue do you think this will be, and do you think we'll see the West supplying fighter jets to Ukraine?
My expectation would be yes. I mean, they have supplied our Soviet types of fighter jets.
The old MiGs.
The old MiGs. I have no idea how old they are in terms of efficiency and reliability. But if we review the past pattern and the timing of deliveries, Ukraine asked for a kind of equipment, a kind of weapon, and we said no, maybe not now. 3 months later, the West or a group of Western countries would ultimately supply the weapons. If this pattern holds, I would not be surprised that we will see Western fighter jets delivered or modernized, delivered and upgraded, delivered to Ukraine in a few weeks or a few months. And this may also be a group, and you spoke of an international coalition where Germany might be a part. I would think that the sentiment of we are dragged into a third world war, which has been defining the public debate a half a year ago or 5 months ago around Christmas, is has been calmed down a little bit, if this is the word, or it's not as nagging as it before. Now the public is up in arms about the Greens and their scandals and their the rather stupid policy to replace heating systems in households, which the public doesn't like. That's now the front page thing, are not so much the war in the Ukraine, where we thought the third war was imminent and the Germans always get them crazy and think, well, the end is near, but before the end comes, we have to go to Mallorca first place. But now I don't want to make fun out of a very serious thing. I would not be surprised if eventually also Germany would contribute, or at least help finances, help supply it in one way or the other. Or if this is a good idea to always to the last minute to provide the equipment, have them train a few weeks before, not to have a sort of long range planning at hand, I don't know. I have an idea. I think this is not. I think it's not the smarter thing, but I knew we had Ukrainians training on German territory on maneuver areas on Germany's long-range artillery as early as last summer, before there was a clear commitment to send our air defense or artillery, big guns, howitzers, and so forth.
Yeah.
So I would not be surprised to see Germany be part of a group. But let me again emphasize to you, Steve, and to our members of the audience here, that it is really important to have a defense minister, who, by the way, is now, as we speak, the most popular minister and politician in the country. I mean, a defense minister is usually not the most popular minister. Even Gutenberg at his best time was not a superstar in terms of polls. Now it's the most popular politician because people understand what is at stake. They understand the nature of our deficits and what we need. And he makes a long-term commitment that says, no, we have to do this and that to be a reliable ally and a credible partner and part of the West to defend us, Germans, Europe, and the West as a collective agent, so to speak. That's very, I find it very important. Here you can see our change in leadership sometimes really makes a difference.
Yeah. Klaus-Dieter, a couple of our viewers have questions about sort of the financial dimension of all of this support to Ukraine. One of our viewers is curious what the reaction of the German finance minister, but also the other European finance ministers, has been related to this increased commitment and pledge to Ukraine. And another viewer is curious where Germany is getting all of the money to support Ukraine.
Well, that's a very good question. But let's remind our viewers that the heated debates in the past are don't we send more weapons faster? The critics were the Greens and the Liberal Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
The Liberal Democrats and the Greens. So the finance minister, Christian Lindner, who really tried to get his budget together and, has reemphasized that the debt break in the Constitution must be preserved and maintained, and we have to go to, the strings attached are we tightened the belt a little bit, so to speak, financially, while the SPD now thinks after the first year in handing out money to the Bundeswehr can now go on showering welfare allocations on a well-receiving public. The money becomes an issue because on the hot right, for example, those who are very critical of the German approach to the war, it's not a conflict, it's a war, are say, well, we don't want to spend our money for Ukraine, for our weapons to send to the Ukraine. We want to spend the money for our kindergarten in Germany, road construction in Germany, domestic versus international priorities, these things. But this dichotomy has not reached a point where it becomes dangerous to the government. The finance minister, actually, he is saying we cannot dole out lavishly welfare spending. He's more critical on the welfare side of it, our Bürgergeld and all the other things. And I would say when it comes to our European partners, particularly France and Italy in particular, with the UK being out of the EU, I would say their point is that their military support to Ukraine has been underwhelming. They have much room to improve. And they have not reached a point where one really can say this is a credible or a position. France and Italy had announced the delivery of an air defense system, which is thought to be a good one, modern, efficient. It's still somewhere between Milano and Paris. Nobody has an idea when it's on the ballot, when it would come to Ukraine, when it will be delivered. So they have a lot of room to move to improvement. The German question of the finances, who's paying for it, is a pretty domestic one, and with our sometimes parochial, not insignificant, not naive, and not a domestic side of it. Lindner is not now saying no. He's saying as long as it takes. But we have to set our national priorities right.
Right.
And this is a priority.
Right. Switching topics just a little bit. We've been focused on Saturday and this announcement, and then some of the talks between Zelensky and Scholz. On Sunday, President Zelensky was presented the very prestigious Charlemagne Prize in the city of Aachen. And traditionally, this award is given to people who have promoted German unity. Some of the past honorees have included Winston Churchill, Pope Francis, Angela Merkel, Bill Clinton. And it seems clear that the war in Ukraine has done a lot to promote European solidarity, but there is a little bit of irony here because, of course, Ukraine is not part of the European Union, even though Kyiv has been trying to make the case to join. Can you talk a little bit about the significance of this recognition of Zelensky with the Charlemagne Prize?
I find it significant. I find it that someone representing a country fighting a war, but are asked for being recognized as a potential member of the EU now
Mhm.
and in the darkest hour, so to speak, is eventually recognized as a serious candidate for membership. Now, it
Mhm.
tells you a lot bit about the dynamics within the EU, but it also tells you a lot bit, or in European circles. And Aachen, those who award the prize are probably the most are integrationist group and groupings in Germany and in Western Europe in general.
Mhm.
Aachen is a symbol of European uh,
Mhm.
integration, the European project, as they call it. And
Mhm.
it's really a recognition, yes, are not just on the books, but in reality, Ukraine will become a member a member of the EU. Now, we all know this negotiations are an arcane subject. It will not become tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, but it's on the line. And it's now publicly recognized that this is not a country where a lot of people thought it's somehow somehow related to Russia. It's not a nation in and by itself,
Mhm.
but it's rather an appendix of Russia. No, it is a country with it's a nation, a country with its own aspirations, and we recognize them. And if we mean it that they defend our values and interests, we
Mhm.
have to do something about it. And we
Mhm.
start, with the prize, the award, at least a symbolic recognition when we understand this and stand
Mhm.
it, and we will do our best financially now in terms of helping to reconstruct when it is possible to reconstruct the country without as long as it takes, as you had it from the very beginning, to help the country, uh,
Mhm.
fulfill their dreams and aspirations. I think
Yeah.
That's fair. I'm not naive to see the Ukraine become a member anytime soon. Or I am not naive about the concerns and conflict and interest by some member states. Let's say big agriculture producers in France are probably not so happy about a grain producer of the size of Ukraine.
Mhm.
Though it will be complicated, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
But if we mean it, then we have to do it.
Yeah.
And this was the recognition, at least in a highly loaded symbolic moment, are that is rather serious.
Yeah. Klaus-Dieter, a couple of our viewers have raised questions sort of about the duration of the conflict and sort of different scenarios about how it might end. A little bit earlier in our conversation, you said that there's certainly hope for an end of the conflict this year. I think both of us are a little skeptical about that.
Yeah.
I certainly have been describing what I think is going to be a hot frozen conflict for a extended period of time. I don't think that this will be over soon, and we will obviously see fighting continuing for quite a while. One question is that with this new sort of commitment of weapons from its Western allies, do you think that this means that the military counteroffensive that Ukraine has talked about launching will now start? And what do you think the timing might be for the military equipment that's been pledged to actually show up and be used on the battlefield?
Well, I would think that the counteroffensive, it may have already started. It's about to start. It will start in a few weeks. This is not important as such if it starts today or in 2 weeks' time. Important is that we need to understand that this will be a long period. It will not be over in a few days or a few weeks. This will be a long process. A long process to make this a strategic one. The Ukraine needs to make needs to have a strategic impact, both on the battlefield, a major breakthrough on an enormous chunk of territory, and a major strategic impact on the thinking of the Kremlin. Read Vladimir Putin.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know. I would think all of us don't know what he thinks, what the regime leadership really thinks about the end game from Russia's side.
Mm-hmm.
What are their red lines? When are they willing to pull back the troops, if they're willing to pull back the troops, or if they are ready to engage in a worn-out conflict for maybe even years, not just months, for years and years, are frozen conflicts that flares up once in a while, which would be a disaster. I think Russia assumes they can mobilize equipment, troops, they can send them into fire, and nobody cares much about it.
And related to that, one of our viewers is curious whether or what the thinking in Germany is, if Ukraine was not successful with this counteroffensive in making the kind of progress that you're talking about. What if Russia is able to defend the territory that it's already gotten? What if Russia even is able to push the Ukrainians back further? How much thinking is going into that in Berlin and Germany as a whole, that it's not a given that Ukraine will win?
Well, this is true. It's not a given, but I'm optimistic, if this is the right word. I'm optimistic that the counter offensive will have an effect. I mean, we hear unbelievable numbers of Russian casualties. The front lines are basically stagnant. We have a situation now which is reminds us of the war in 1916, 1917, 1918, in the early part of 1918, where the front lines actually just moved a couple of meters back and forth for months and months. And we are probably at this moment now, that's why Russia fired these missiles, even the Kinzhal missiles, are against civilian infrastructure, because there's no advance on the battleground. There's no advance territory-wise. So they use what they have against civilian infrastructure. I would think that this counteroffensive and the supplies the West provides will make a difference. Make a difference, and then we will see. Will it end? I'm not so sure. Or then both sides need to come up with a position for themselves. But I would not underestimate either the craziness, the determination of Russia to inflict as much or nihilistically damage on the Ukraine as possible. This is part of traditional Russian thinking, if you go back to in the centuries. And I would also not underestimate the willingness of the Ukrainians, to resist. The determination not to give up, and the determination to recover, because they know if they give in, they may be up for another brutal or surprised in 2 years' time, or so forth, so long as the regime of Vladimir Putin is in place.
So Klaus-Dieter, as we start to wrap up, I have two closing questions for you that go in slightly different directions. The first is maybe opening a whole other topic that we could easily spend an hour on, but I think it's important and timely. We've not really talked about China at all in our conversation today, and this is an interesting week because China's special representative on Eurasian affairs is visiting Ukraine, Russia, and Germany and France, and I think a couple of other European countries, as part of Beijing's sort of self-proclaimed role as middleman in the war, and in an effort to try to come up with some sort of a peace agreement or peace bargain. Are you expecting anything from the visit by Special Representative Li Hui this week on the continent? Do you see any special role for China in trying to broker a peace?
Well, we try to understand here in the West. I would think all of us are on your side of the pond and ours, how close actually the China leadership is with Vladimir Putin. Are they really on the same side? Do they read from the same sheet of paper? Or if this whole exercise, we have a peace plan, or at least a plan for a ceasefire, had this more to do with Taiwan than with the conflict itself, the war itself. Or China has one interest that's totally clear. They won't be part of our on the receiving side of major sanctions. So that's clear. That's clear to me. On the other side, from their side, what to speak against a drawn-out conflict.
Mm-hmm.
As long as this conflict goes on, or particularly the United States is not as much focused as it wishes on the Indo-Pacific
Mm-hmm.
and on China.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of security policy, defense policy, I know the big lines are clear, but if you have a hot war in Europe, you do not spend so much of your time, energy, attention, and resources on a potential war or a conflict theater around the world. If this is the big test, if this is the revolt, as it is said, of the rest against the West, with Russia being the instigator, being the aggressor, the one that brings this about, of course, China wants to see, well, Europe dissociated from the United States.
Yeah.
That's what Putin wants. He wants to split the EU. That's almost something which China doesn't object to, or bring the Eastern Europeans away from the Western, have divisions as much as possible. Of course, divide et impera, as has been learned in the Latin class decades ago. That's as it is. So there are strategic points where one would think are political, diplomatically, of at least, of course, financially, energy-wise, China is on the side of Putin. I don't think they want to be drawn in physically in anything. They don't want to be caught by sending weapons, and this would make a major, major difference.
Yeah. So Klaus,
and the peace plan itself, I'm not so sure how serious it is.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So last but not least, I'd like to close with one of the questions that came from our viewers, who's curious what your sense is. If you look 5 years into the future, which countries do you think will be the top 3 military powers in Europe?
5 years, I would say it will be 4, not 3. It will be the UK. They are above the 2% goal of NATO. Mm-hmm. It will be France. It will be Poland. They have beefed up their budget dramatically, and will continue to do so. And eventually, I will think, I know my Germany, I think, pretty well. Mm-hmm. Well, there's a pattern in German behavior. Now, a little bit reluctant to begin with, a little bit slow to begin with all sorts of objections, but we are the last to leave. Mm-hmm. So eventually we'll come around, and I do think the leadership now is serious with our, putting our German armed forces on solid ground, on a sound footing, put the money where the mouth is, and do this on a long term. Mm-hmm. There are signs that they mean it. There are signs that give rise to objections and concern. But I would think Germany might have a military that is a credible force for the security of all of us.
Yeah. So two comments, right? I mean, one is it's interesting that you would include Germany in that list, but of course at the bottom of the list, because it still has a lot of work to do. But I also am a little surprised that you didn't mention Ukraine, because I would think that with all of the military equipment that's going into Ukraine right now, with the fact that there are battle-hardened soldiers,
absolutely.
5 years from now, the strongest military power in Europe is going to be Ukraine.
Well, you see my parochialism. I thought when you speak of Europe, I mean, you meant more or less the old EU.
Yeah,
that's my parochialism.
Yeah,
I admit you are definitely right. And we have learned, all of us, to our surprise, and I must say, gives credit, an enormous credit to the Ukraine people and to the Ukraine military, how battle-hardened they have become, and how ingenious. I read papers from our military specialists that NATO has so much to learn from the ingenuity of of our Ukrainian military leadership and of the soldiers on the background, how they are adapt to and integrate all sorts of communication systems and weapon system in a remarkable fashion.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. They are probably, as you said, the number one military force. But 5 years is a long time in history, and
Yeah.
keep our fingers crossed that the war will not be drawn out that long.
Yeah. Yeah.
This would be
Absolutely.
my almost a prayer-like ending.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I think you've brought us to a good ending point of our conversation today. Sadly, I think that the war in Ukraine is a topic that we will be talking about for months to come. And I certainly look forward to talking to you again about this issue, but also about other international issues, drawing on your time as foreign editor at the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung and just your wealth of experience and insight. But for today, Klaus-Dieter Frankenberger, ein herzlichen Dank. It is always wonderful to talk to you, and I really appreciate your taking the time to speak with us today.
Again, thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to be with you.